if it doesn't bother you, I'm gonna record the session so that we can put it and share it with anyone that wasn't able to attend and put it on YouTube. Today, basically what I'm going to share is, if you came to advanced extemporaneous speaking, then I'm assuming you kind of know at least the basics, right? Like you can give a structured speech. You can fill up most of your speech time. You understand basic structure of an intro, body points, conclusion. Is that a fair assumption? Okay. And there'll be open opportunities to the end. I'm going to try and save about 20 minutes for question and answers. So make sure you're thinking of questions or anything that you have during the lecture, or and I want you to interact during the lecture as well, but anything different that isn't included in the lesson today, make sure that you ask questions, and we can get into specific things that can help you as an individual specifically, especially we only got 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, 10. So I'm gonna stand on this side since y'all are all on that side, so I don't block it. So I got a fancy little slide here. I'm working with Canva. Y'all ever use Canva? This is my first time. I really just kind of discovered it, and I'm trying to be fancy. So you're in advanced extemp. We already talked about that. So main thing I want to do is talk about the 3 key things. Well, I guess 4 key things that I think have separated my students from the other students in extemporaneous speaking. So I've had 4 times I've had a student make state finals, and all 4 of those times, really that's been in consecutive years. I was, as soon as I felt like I, figured it out as a coach, my first 4 or 5 years, I was learning just like a student would learn. And then once you kind of emulate and imitate and practice and make mistakes and, take a couple L's, then you kind of figure out and change. So the 4 things that I think have separated my students over the last 4 years, we want state championship 19, 20 was COVID, 21 state championship, 22 state championship, and then we won a state championship in 23. So other than COVID, that's 5 consecutive years of having a student win an informative state championship. I don't know why. All the persuasive, not as much luck, but informative I seem to have down. But there's really not much difference. I put my top kids seem to be informative speakers. So the first way is implementation of a significant statement. Does anybody in here feel like they know or have used a significant statement prior to today?
It wasn't really for debate-related reasons. It was for like a mapping controversy essay.
Okay.
It was basically saying, okay, well, these are the people it impacts, and it was basically saying this issue matters and why it matters. I usually prefer having specific groups of people mentioned.
Yeah.
Because when you mention a group of people, that feels a lot more significant than just saying the economy or having more general statement.
Sure.
So the more specific, and don't be too specific, not just this one person, but the more or you specify it up to a few groups of people, the more you seem like where you're at.
Yep. Absolutely. So we're going to dive deeper into each of these sections. But the significant statement is just that. It's just providing that context and framing as to why the question is important. And then transitions are a big area where there seems to be a large gap between people in the room. And if you, is anybody school member of NSDA? National Speech and Debate Association, Nationals? Okay. It's not a big deal, but they have, they have them for free as well. Some of the older ones, the ones from last year are hidden behind a membership, but they have a ton of free resources, even if you aren't a member of the National Speech and Debate Association. But they, you can watch and go and watch previous final rounds and start, I talk about, I use a lot of sports analysis. I played sports growing up as well. I did debate all through high school, but also, I went to a small school. So you did basketball, debate, baseball, everybody ran cross country type of thing. If you were in athletics. So, but you can watch and break down film and really analyze. And especially today, I challenge you to take what I'm showing you in a structural format and then watch some national finals rounds and listen for that structure and listen to see how they're implementing and how they're using this structure. And so that's basically what I did as a coach, is just start saying, okay, this person's winning state or this person's winning nationals, and in study is what is it that they're doing that we're not doing? What is it that's different that they're doing that's different from the second place person? What is it that's separating them from that? And then combining that with ballots. So we're going to talk about how to really take transitions from just basic onto my second point and really add value and create differentiation for yourself so that you can separate yourself from the competition. And then in the body points, we're going to talk about substructure. Basically giving your body points a little more fluidity and purpose into your points instead of having just general information or just kind of a big block of content. You can have a little bit more flow. It'll do two things for you. It will give your content more fluidity, so like you're building upon the warrants and the data and the information that you're saying, but then also it makes your speech more fluid because you're moving in a direction. Right? If you think about your speech and similar to, I'm getting ahead of myself. And then the final one, we'll talk about how to utilize a flexible conclusion. And so the biggest part of Extemp is time management, right? Being able to speak long enough, not long enough. I mean, that's just a general scoring mechanism. If you speak for 4 minutes, you're going to have a tough time beating someone who speaks for 650. That doesn't mean that it can't happen, right? But in general, you have to be good at your time management. If you go over 7 minutes, you risk DQ. If you go too short, you risk leaving information on the table. You risk the judge punishing you for not giving a full speech or managing your time well. And then, and finally, you prevail. That's the idea. So the goal is here the 4 things that I think that my students do well or have done well that has allowed them to be successful. In those final rounds, you can see and watch that these are things that my student does or my speakers have done that other speakers haven't. So like I said, I'm just going to spit the content out, and then at the end of each section, open up for any questions or thoughts. Okay. So significant statement is just that, what the gentleman over there said, that it is, why is it important? Okay. Whenever we're framing this question, we want to give the listener, remember, keep everything in context. Do y'all do debate events as well? Right? Most schools you'll do a speaking and a debate. Like for me, my team, we have main events, which are debate. You're going to do Congress, Lincoln Douglas, or policy, one of those 3. And then you're also going to do a secondary event, which is extemporaneous or prose and poetry. Or maybe if the team's large enough, then we might open up some of those like original oratory or other events like that, but as a secondary event. But so the question is, in significant statement, is just like in debate of like framing the listener, framing the judge as to why your question is important and why your answer matters, right? When you're a public speaker or you're doing a public address competition, the object, right, is to entertain and engage the listener. Now, the judge has some qualitative types of measurement, like checking the box, like did you have an intro? Did you restate the question? There are some checking the box aspects that is I consider that more introductory to Extemp. So I'm assuming that we're kind of already taking that approach of just checking the box of having like the basic structure of our recipe. Like we, have some background, we pose the question, we answer the question clearly, we preview points, right? Those are just mechanics of doing it. Now, a significant statement is something that not every speaker has, and especially this last year, watching the final round, this was one thing that my student had that no other speaker had in their speech. And, I like to believe that it made a difference. And so significant statement is implemented right before you pose the question. And so, if you think about the way that the speech starts out, you go an attention-getting device into some background, and then as you're listening, you link your attention-getting device to the topic, into your background. Hopefully, you should be providing some kind of source or warranted information inside that background. As you leave that and you're getting into the question, you want to provide that framing. And the gentleman talked about essays, and extemporaneous speak is no different than any essay you ever write. And if you really work at becoming a good extemporaneous speaker, it's going to translate into every other class in college. Like writing essays will become so easy because you learn how to write a good essay in 30 minutes. Like who couldn't benefit from that in college? So, so it answers the question, one of these questions. It doesn't have to always be the same, but why does this question matter, right? Why is this question relevant? Why should the listener give you the next 5-6 minutes of their life, right? Like that's essentially your goal in this significant statement. It's like you're going to want to listen to this because it's very important, right? Sometimes the questions can be, you would think they'd be obvious. It's like something about the war in Israel, right? Like that has some large impact. The war in Ukraine, or when the COVID-19 was happening, there was a lot of questions about the pandemic, and that has a lot of natural interest because of how broad it is. But sometimes you get questions about, the election in Zimbabwe, or something that's a little bit more, a little bit smaller in content, or doesn't relate to the average listener. So you want to have this in every speech, and it's really actually very simple. So you can think about creating the significance. Oh, look at that. You can think about creating the significance statement by answering one of these questions. For if you're just starting to use it, being in specifics can be good if it works. But remember, the goal is not to appease yourself or provide significance for you to understand. Your goal is always to engage the listener, aka the judge or the panel, if you will, so you want to give a significant statement that is a little bit more general in this sense, because you're trying to engage another person that you don't necessarily have a personal relationship with. So if you knew the person really well and you could get specific to what they liked and they were interested in, yeah, sure, get specific. Get something specific to them. If you do have some information on them, that's fine. But in general, most of the time you don't really know the judge on a personal level, or enough to really personalize the speech to them. So in general, you can provide significance to them in a wider range so that you can ensure that you're gaining their interest, right? So what this literally will sound like, and if I have time, I'll pull up a clip. What this sounds like is, as you're leaving the background, you're coming into your question, you're going to say, so, with the United States economy hanging in the balance, we must ask ourselves, will the war in Israel, increase taxes or whatever? I don't have a question on hand, but you're literally just going to provide context of like what type of impact or what type of effect or who might be affected by the speech. And I don't use canned stuff, but we use the same 2 to 3 kind of structure of the sentences with American lives depending on action. We ask ourselves, how will the Biden administration, with American families, decidedly waiting, something along that lines. You're just giving them in a context of something. It makes this transition from background to your question so much smoother. And so you're not just like really dry when you drop the question in there, but then also you just give a little bit of impact, prefacing your impacts that you're going to do in your speeches, which we'll get into in the substructure. So think about how you can frame the question so the listener thinks the answer is important to them, is really the main thing. Yes, sir.
Wouldn't it be better to combine multiple of these, because you're already taking some time out in if we
combine multiple what?
Wouldn't it be better to address multiple of them in the same sentence specifically too? For example, in your earlier example, wouldn't it be better or just say with the raising taxes thing, add on, especially now in a time of I don't know, mass unemployment?
Sure. Yeah. No, you can get a little bit deeper into that. I was just giving it in general. And if you watch some of the national finalists, they might even do double significant statement. They say, with the rise of gun violence and American, students fearing more and more to go to school, or something along that lines. They might go 2 levels deep with gun violence, and then specifically school environments because of gun violence or something like that. Depending on what the question is. But yeah, you can do that if you want. Absolutely. You don't want to, I wouldn't go past kind of doubling up though, because then at some point, you just kind of are spinning. Yeah, because it's just a preview. It's just a taste. Your impacts are going to be inside of your body points. But yeah, absolutely. Does anybody have any questions on significant statement? So it goes right in between your background and before you pose a question. And the good thing is, I think it's on the next slide. The significant statement can be used throughout the speech to make transitioning and linking back to your answer and framing your impacts inside of your speech a lot easier. And so when you think about where do I put the significant statement, you want to put it in the introduction. See, I got a little ahead of myself. between the background and posing the question. So if we're talking about, let's just say a general question about inflation, right? Is inflation on the rise in the United States? Let's just say that's our question. Then our background is, over the last decade, inflation has risen by 7.8%, blah, 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 New York Times, something, something, something. So with American families struggling to get by, we must ask ourselves the question, or we must ask today's question, or we can ask the question, or you don't really have to say we must pose the question or ask the question. It's usually a good sign, because a good thing to do, because you're going to trigger the judge's ears to hear like, oh, this is the prompt. They're checking that box. It's kind of like signposting in debate. It's like on to the dissat, or on to the counterplan, or on to contention 2, right? It just gives that judge the audio trigger to know that you moved into posing the question. So then we also use the significant statement in our transitions, and this is where we're going to move forward into the second kind of area. The significant statement is my favorite way to transition from the third body point into the conclusion, because it seems like one of the hardest ways, or the hardest transition to hit, is that in conclusion, because you're really just kind of like, so with all that being said, right, like you end up with just a general, so in conclusion, or to review, or so clearly that means something along that lines. So instead, you replace reuse that significant statement there. So as you're finishing your third body point, you come out and you bring in the significant statement as your transition, and so you've just given the third answer. So clearly, inflation is on the rise. So as we wonder whether American families will be able to handle the rising inflation, we can clearly see that inflation is on the rise. So, or the pose the question, what was the question? Like, is inflation on the rise in the United States? We can clearly see the answer is yes, because of, government spending. And we saw that government spending in 3 key areas: first, second, and third. And then you call back to your AGD. So that significant statement can just give you a nice, easy transition, because if you think about the way you used it to start, it was your preface into the question. So if you use that, your transition into your conclusion, you come right back into your question again. And I think that's the hardest, or a lot of times where the fluency or the conclusion gets broken down, is that there's just no smooth way of restating the question again at the end. So if you give that significance back in kind of a post-tense context, that's a tongue twister, post-tense context, right? Like, you don't say it exactly the same way, but you say it in a way that that is in a reference to the previous 5 minutes of arguing that you did that inflation was on the rise. Then you can transition right back into that question easily, and it doesn't mess your fluidity up, and then it doesn't feel quite as what's the word I'm looking for? Rigid, robotic, right? Like procedural, right? A lot of you listen to speeches and they're just like, they've been taught the recipe, and so they're just checking the box, and it's very like isolated piece connected to another piece connected to another piece, without any real smoothing or transitioning through each piece of the recipe. So this is one thing that I think, as much as it helps in the intro, I think that using it as your transition into your conclusion, I'm going to trip over this, into your conclusion, is one of the best ways to use it throughout your speech. And also, when it forces you to develop a significant statement in the intro, then when you're writing your body points, you have a little bit more direction and context for what you're actually trying to argue, right? If you're talking about the struggle of American families, and then you're arguing and you're bringing in some information about how, basic food staples have doubled over the last decade or something like that, and then you can go back to impacting that to American families. And it just gives your speech a lot more connectivity. It brings everything together under a basic principle. Sound good? Okay, let's go to the second area. Maybe.
Probably not.
There we go. So I'm trying to be funny here, okay? So create transitions that are bussin', right? As the kids say these days, y'all use bussin'? No? Is that passed already? Is that already in the back? Okay, well, this still works though, all right? I don't know. I've gone through on fleek and then now bussin', and I don't know. Can't keep up with it. So, anyways, the acronym though, I like to create funny acronyms for my kids because that's the way that they learn, right? Y'all, how'd y'all learn stock issues? Did y'all learn it through an acronym? Yeah, y'all debate. Y'all, any of you debate policy? Do policy debate? Nobody else? No. Okay, just never mind. So, anyways, acronym here for how to create transitions. So we want to get away from just saying on to my second point or on to my third point. Those are transitions, but they're literally the base elementary style. You're getting started. You got to focus on other parts first. So now in advanced extemporaneous, we can move into a little bit more of the nuance to spruce it up and create transitions that are AKA bussin', right? So in our transition, there's a little formula that I like to use, and it doesn't necessarily all have to go in this area or in this order, but it needs to contain all the pieces of this recipe. So in your transition, you're going to provide what we call a top. A lot of times in the national circuit or at the highest level, they call them tops. And basically that just means that you're providing some background or some information on top of your point. So if you want to think about your transition becoming a mini background into your point, it doesn't necessarily have to be like happened in the past type of background, but it can just be some unique piece of information that maybe doesn't fit into the overall flow of your point or your argument, or it can be some background that provides context to your point, right? So, in the idea of inflation, if our general question is inflation on the rise in the United States, and the background was talking about how inflation has gone, just in general, inflation has risen. And our first point is that, yes, it's on the rise. And our first point is like food staples, right? And we talk about bread and eggs and milk and dairy or all that. Then our background or our transition can go into, in 2005, the price of eggs was 99 cents for a dozen, and now at the store it's $3.50 for a dozen of eggs. And so clearly, the first reason that's why signpost is first, second, third. You still want to have that in there. So eggs have gone up. Ooh, this is not good and bad. I'm not used to. Eggs have gone up by over 200% in the last 3 years, and that's the first way that we can see inflation is on the rise. Inflation is on the rise because American families are being impacted by a rise in food staples or food prices or something like that, right? Or flip that. Yeah. So you include your point thesis. I flipped the subject and thesis where I pointed. So it's like background. Eggs have gone up by over $2 in the last 3 years, which is a 200% increase in the price of dairy. Yeah. Which is the first reason that we can see American families struggle because inflation is on the rise in food prices or something like that lines. So your point thesis is your background is that little piece of information that's a little bit more specific to your point, right? Your umbrella is the actual answer. Do y'all utilize umbrella now? Umbrella is kind of like an intermediate area. Most of the solid extempores use it, newbies don't, and any top level extempores will definitely use an umbrella. Do y'all utilize an umbrella? Or we need? Okay, we'll do a little mini umbrella answer thing. So umbrella answer is basically the idea that you need to give a clear, concise answer to the question, right? If you ever look at an extemp ballot, it always asks, did the speaker answer the question? And that's honest. I swear to you, you can chop the state finals room in half by the top 3 answered the question clearly, and the bottom 3 did not answer the question clearly, all the way in state finals. I'm being serious. If we pulled up state finals from last year, I could point you 2 to 3 of those top 6 that didn't answer the question clearly. Like, we can't sit here and say, what was their answer? It was blank. So your umbrella is that answer to give that judge the clear, concise answer to your question. So when you answer the question, it's not is inflation on the rise? Yes, because food prices, this and that, right? You're giving them 3 potential answers or 3 reasons that the answer is correct. But you want to give them a general one line. If I asked you, why is inflation on the rise? Your answer is because one thing, right? Because this, and that's your answer. If someone gave you like a 3-part answer to a question, it's more of like they're giving you the arguments and not the answer. And so that's one thing that you can implement. So when you're posing the question in the introduction, is inflation on the rise in the United States? Yes, because American families are unable to purchase the same necessities that they could a decade ago. And we can see that in food prices, housing prices, and automobile market. I don't know, I'm just picking random stuff now. But yeah.
So sometimes you like find yourself in, and I mean, I don't know how common this is. It's just like a personal experience that I've had to deal with like once or twice.
Sure.
Where you have, like you have a point that's like really easy to argue because there's like this one main point. Like in the example you just gave, is inflation on the rise? Someone might be like, okay, well, here are the numbers. The numbers say yes, so obviously yes.
Sure.
But then you find yourself, okay, well, I don't have anything left for the other 2 points because I just taken this first point and it's just like almost a fact.
Well, then if you find yourself there, I would think the first thing I would do is try and make that 1 point your umbrella and then create 3 reasons why that 3 different arguments underneath that 1 point. If this 1 point is, is that obvious, then maybe that's not your point and that's instead your answer. And then you can divide that thing into 3 points, because if it's that obvious, more likely there's enough content underneath it to create 3 separate points, right? You could do, if you just want to do inflation on the rise, you could just do housing prices because the housing market, and then you could impact out the housing market 3 times. The housing market has created, homelessness epidemic, has created a more default in debt, which is then creating more inflation. It's creating this cycle. And then finally, you're seeing less economic mobility because people are not able to sell their house and buy a new house. So they're staying in place, which means it's the economy is slowing down, and that's impacting the house. Like I said, I'm spitballing here, so don't go Googling everything I'm saying, but you could
just be that compelling argument and like focus on one faucet.
Sure.
Especially if you're just like,
because no one's going to debate you. No one's going to try and outweigh your speech, right? It's not like someone else going to give the same speech and then come back and be like, oh, they had a better answer, right? Nobody's going to have the same topic as you, so you don't have to compete on that scale. So you really just need to give a good answer and then prove that answer right 3 times, right? Prove your answer right 3 times. It can get small, right? And that happens. Sometimes you're searching your question and everything you're finding is just about this one thing, right? It's all just this one answer, which in your first thought is like, oh, that's going to be a point. And then you're going to have to pivot, like you said, and be like, I can't find any other points in this. Well, then just kind of shift it up and dive into 3 different ways that that's correct, or 3 different ways that you can prove that housing prices are the reason that inflation is rising, or how the housing prices has impacted American families, right? Because that was your significant statement. So then you can work with that as well and then have 3 solid points. So think about your answer as just that, your answer, right? The reason, because blank, clear, concise, umbrella answer. And that's why they call it an umbrella answer, is because literally you want your answer to be overarching and then you can fit your 3 points underneath. And so your answer is going to be something more broad, generic, overarching theme, right? Typically, you're going to coach it and you're going to find 3 points, and then you're going to find some kind of concept or theme that you can draw that's big enough that encompasses those 3 points. Is usually the way it functions. Sometimes you just kick one of your points up and that becomes your umbrella, and then you have 3 things underneath that, and if you can adjust. Does that make sense? Okay. So in a transition, you're going to give a little background. You're going to provide that umbrella answer, right? That says, that's causing American families to struggle, or whatever it is. A clear, concise answer. Inflation is on the rise because of egregious government spending, or inflation is on the rise because of aftershocks of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we can see those aftershocks in 3 key areas. First, food prices, second, housing market, third, automobile pricing. I'm just creating 3 different markets. That's just a spitball. But your umbrella is because of aftershocks of the COVID-19 pandemic, or because of government spending, or because of international trade, or whatever. Whatever the theme of your speech is, direction, you can just create a general overarching statement that can fit into that. Your signpost is telling them just that. This is my first point. This is my second point. This is my third point. You still need that, right? But you want to dress it up and embed it, right? You want to wrap it up into real nice, a little bit of background on top, an umbrella answer to give it context, and then the first way that we can see the aftershocks of the COVID-19 pandemic is in food prices. And so you go back into the subject matter. The thesis is your point preview, right? As you provide your point thesis. I tried to put point thesis here, but it just messed my slide up and it wasn't looking very pretty. So I had to shorten it to just thesis. But basically, I mean point thesis. So whatever your point is. If your first point is food prices, then that's your point thesis. So it's like eggs have gone up. We can see, the aftershocks of the COVID-19 pandemic is the first way that food prices are proving inflation is on the rise, right? The subject is about the question. So in the question, you're almost always going to have some kind of subject matter, right? Like is it about the federal government? Is it inflation, or is it Zimbabwe, or is it, Brexit, or whatever kind of the heart of the question is? Then you can bring that back into your transition. And the good thing about this is when you practice it, it just becomes natural because you're not having to create or write anything new. You're just taking the pieces of your already existing structure and putting them together to form your transitions. And they become, when you do them and you practice them, you don't have to write transitions. You don't have to think about it. Instead, when it comes time that you're moving out of conclusion, your brain just goes into transition mode and you just put it together. Now, you might have to write your little background, find, a little piece of tidbit, say, okay, what's going to be my top? Is what you can refer to them as. Basically, I think it's easier to learn if you just think of it as like a little bit of background information. Egg prices, milk prices, housing prices, just something specific to the topic that gives it a little context or a little extra information. Does that make sense? Is that helpful? If you have questions, I want to make this helpful for you. So if you have questions, or if I'm going over, or something doesn't make sense, please ask questions. I'm not too proud to answer or go back and redo. Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, so is it bad to just do something similar for every transition sentence? Like, can I spit out one fact that's like basically shoot one of my evidence points as every single one of my transitions, or do I want to vary that on?
You wouldn't want to use something that you're going to put into your point. This just needs to be like a little tidbit on the top of your point to just kind of help you transition. Really, remember, this is part of a transition. So your whole goal and purpose and function of this is to get you nice and smoothly from one point to the next, right? So you don't want to preview or use anything of where you're going that's in front of you. You want to give a little information to get the listener to come with you from your intro to your first point.
So and at the same time, egg prices are on the rise, nearly 200% increase from the 2010s.
Yeah, I mean, and you don't. And one thing that I see a lot of extempors do is they feel like they have to use those extra words. Like if you put these structures together appropriately, you don't need to do extra work to connect them, right? It's kind of like I use a lot of cooking analogies in my class of like if you put the ingredients together in the right order, they mix nice and easy, right? If you do the dry separate and then the wet and then you put them together, it becomes easy. If you just put it all together in the proper order, then you got to do a lot of extra work to make it nice and smooth. So if you're putting it together appropriately, you don't have to use any extra words or fillers or conversational language to make it make sense. It'll naturally go together. So you can just stack sentences on top of each other. So as like an example there is, let's pretend that I'm moving out of my intro. So it's like, is inflation on the rise in the United States? And the answer is yes, because the aftershocks of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we can see those aftershocks in three key areas. First, food prices. Second, housing prices. And third, the automobile market. So over the last decade, we have seen eggs almost double in price. And that's the first reason that's the first way that COVID-19 aftershocks have affected and caused more inflation for the American families. New York Times published an article, and now boom, I'm into my my body point structure. And so whenever you can peg that together, you get a little bit more lighthearted. That's fancy. You get a little bit more lighthearted, and that's what the next slide is about. Do what?
I don't know, like dragging the slide up.
Yeah, that might. Oh, I see what you're saying. Like, I'll try that next. Yeah.
Can you go over the subject quickly?
Oh, yes. Sorry. That's just like the subject matter of the question. So in this example, it's just like inflation, right? You just want to have some kind of reference back to the question that you posed or that's posed, right? So if we're talking about is inflation on the rise, so you can say like that's egg prices. We've seen egg prices almost, and you could even go a little more lighthearted. Like, the next slide is talking about jokes, and last week my mom sent me for eggs, and I only took $2. Not knowing that egg prices had doubled just since I started high school, right? You can even go that route and get a little bit more pun, funny. If you're a pun person, this is a great place to make puns. I think those are special people that are very good at making puns. And then there are other people that just don't know how to deliver them. So if you're good at making jokes or you're good at making puns or you have that personality, right? Just play to your strengths. If you're very content oriented, you're good at information, then provide information. If you got personality and you're more of a theater level person and you come from that spectrum of Extemp speakers, then put that in. Provide some personal to it. That's fine. You don't want to leave the role play aspect. You don't want to become, your language to become, cafeteria style, where you're sitting at the table with your friends style language. You still want to be, giving a TED talk, haha, funny, personal style. So don't change your style, but you can get a little more personal in that. But I'm still providing the same information, just in a different packaging, right? So if you're an informational, real dry type of personality, then just say, egg prices have gone up by over 200%, right? That's just more newscaster. Or you can be in like, last week I tried to go buy eggs for my mom, but I only had $1.50, not knowing that eggs cost $6, or something, something along that line. Just whatever fits your personality best is what's going to be best and be the most fluid. And I don't think that you'll see a big difference in your results as long as you're hitting it well and checking that box in a nice fluid manner. So the subject matter is literally just whatever the topic, the main heart of that question is, right? The main heart of is inflation on the rise? Just bring back inflation, right? If the conversation is about like how will the results of the Zimbabwe election change African politics, right? Then the subject matter would be that Zimbabwe election, right? Or if it's about what else? The Israel war, right? Any question about, will the United States aid to Israel put an end to the conflict with Hamas? Then, the subject matter is the United States aid to Israel of what's kind of everything's predicated around, right? So just bring that. You don't want to restate the whole question is why I call it the subject, because I used to have it and reference it as like reference the question, but then it kind of brought students back into, they were just bringing the whole question back through, and it became over elongated and we got back to that very like robotics type of presentation. So just bring back that key subject matter, and that's just continuing the question, the answer, your point thesis, all together in a nice little transition. That help? Okay. Any other questions? Let's try that drag. Be smart. Okay, so like I said before, if you have jokes and you want to be funny, this is the place to do it. I challenge you to go watch any Plano West speaker. We're right down the road from Plano West. Plano West had a national champion in domestic Extemp. They had second place and fourth place in international Extemp, and they go to tournaments just in your backyard. So, but they're really good, and what differentiates them is their humor. They really do a purposeful job. They sit and write jokes and implement jokes, and they're good at delivering the jokes. And if you watch them compared to other extempers in the national arena on the national final stage, nobody else really tells jokes as much or as well as they do. And so that's one of the things that differentiates them. So if you're someone who thinks they're funny, you're comfortable with humor, and your coach says that you are funny, right? You being funny to yourself versus you being funny to other people are two different arenas. Okay. But in general, even if it's goofy, if you deliver it right and even it's like a pun or it's goofy, a little funny haha, it doesn't have to be a big long, big hard punchline that gets a roar of laughter. But inside the transitions, this is a nice place to kind of put a little joke there, right? Like I talked about, haha, I couldn't afford eggs, or something along, or if you have like a pun. I'm not a pun person. My brain does not come up with puns very well. But if I've had students that could just whip puns out left and right, and that was a great place to put them. So if you want to tell jokes and you see people tell jokes in speech and you're trying to figure out how to put that in, your transition on top is a great way to do it. Yeah. So let's talk about moving to our next section that I want to cover so we talked about the significant statement is a way that we can improve our intro. We can have something in our intro that others don't have, right? Trying to get this to go away. All right, well, I'll read that if you can't see that. And I'll post this online for y'all to get to as well after the speech. So transitions are in between each point. You transition from your intro to your body point to body point, body point to body point, and then body point to conclusion, right? So you have 1, 2, 3, 4 transitions. And so inside of your body point, you want to start trying to implement some substructure. And this is where it can really and it sounds like it would make your life harder, right? It feels like you're going to have to do more work when you initially think, but it's really called more of an effort of working more efficiently and effectively. So when you're trying to do it, you're going to have to retrain your brain kind of how to think about making body points, learn a new way to do it. But once you learn the new way to do it, they're going to become so much easier because everything's purposeful and flows. So a substructure, and there's multiple substructures. I'm going to focus on the one that I preach and use all the time mainly because my teams, most of the time I'm using, I teach at a 3A school now. I used to teach at a 5A school, but I teach at a 3A school currently. And my teams are almost always like they're doing LD, CX, and Extemp, right? All my debaters do Extemp and all my Extempers do debate, right? They might be an Extemper first and a debater second, or a debater first and Extemper second, but I make them both do both. So we really preach the context of an internal link impacts type of structure inside of our points. Does anybody in here do a debate event? I feel like I know I said policy. Any LD or Congress or anything? Congress. So Congress Extemp, a lot of that. And which is fine. And this will help. You can take everything that I'm putting in here and put it right into your Congress speeches, right? It fits right in, and I would recommend it. You're obviously going to want to adjust the delivery a little bit to change the role that you're playing, right? Congress has a very specific role. And goal of the speech is not for the judge to be engaged, but instead to encourage your fellow representatives to vote with you, right? So those slight adjustments, but structurally you can absolutely use all this to differentiate your Congress speeches as well. So on the top half of your point, we want to use a term and an idea. Have y'all been taught like internal link impact concepts? Have y'all learned that idea? So this thing, I hate erasing. Sorry. Okay, so inside of an argument, right, there's a basic kind of chain for an argument. And we use this in policy debate or LD debate for like contentions or advantages or disadvantages. But I want you to kind of think about, this is the same thing for congressional debate or extemp speaking, of having what we call a link chain for your argument. okay? Because that's what you're doing. Don't think about your points as just information. Think about your points as an argument or a reason why your answer is correct. So you're asked a question, you give an answer, and then you spend the next 3 body points or 5 minutes proving your answer right. So you're making 3 separate arguments to show that the answer you gave to the question is correct. So start thinking about your points in that manner instead of just continually answering the question in different ways throughout the whole speech, okay? So the link chain is basically, you have 4 parts to create. Have y'all ever seen this in your classroom? Any of these acronyms? Dang. All right. So the idea behind any kind of argument, now in Extemp, you don't really need the uniqueness. So I'm not going to, since y'all don't know that, we're not going to worry about that. That's if I'm making an argument like in debate. In Congress, you can use uniqueness a lot. That uniqueness is just the idea that without, like if you're arguing to take action, the uniqueness is the idea that without taking action, this problem will not be solved or this problem will not be alleviated or whatever it is. Or if you're on the flip side and you're saying that like if we take action, something bad will happen, the uniqueness provides the argument or the idea that if we don't do the plan or we don't pass the bill or the legislation, that this impact that we're arguing or this negative reason that you shouldn't do the plan won't happen, right? If we just keep doing what we're doing, then we won't cause any problems or cause any issues. But if we pass this bill or legislation, then that impact will happen, right? Does that make sense? So the uniqueness is the idea that either if we don't do it or do it, whichever way you're whichever side you're on, aff or neg, pro, con, however you want to think about it, affirm, negate, that you're that impact won't occur without action, or the impact won't occur without action.
So like you're addressing what decision you would be making instead and what impact that decision would have if you don't take the decision you're currently advocating for.
Yeah, so like let's say like the bill is like we're talking about Congress now because this is more appropriate usage, but the do what?
What about abortion? Yes or no? Or wouldn't it be like if you're arguing for, and I'm just following you, but like let's say there's a bill on abortion, like legalize it, don't legalize it, whatever, and you're like, yeah, like on the pro side, like wouldn't uniqueness just be okay? Well, if we don't ban abortion, then this is the choice you can make, and this is the impact of that choice.
So uniqueness is just a preview of the future in a world where you get your way, right? So if we like, let's use a less like controversial topic there. Like if we let's just say we are going to pass a bill to provide more aid to Israel, right? Like we write a bill to, increase taxes and give $100 billion to Israel or something like egregious, right? So so uniqueness would be the idea that like if we don't give them aid, then the war in Israel will continue to go on and it will lead to nuclear war. Like, something bad happens. Like if we don't do the plan, here's the world that exists in a world where I don't give away. And if we do the plan, then here comes the link, internal link, and impact. We can give them aid. That aid will lead to a ceasefire because, Hamas will realize that they are not able to combat all of, U.S. military as well as Israel. Like I said, I'm just totally spitballing here. And then the impact would be that you prevent nuclear war or extinction or whatever, your impact is, right? In policy debate or whatever, you're going to go all the way to extinction. In Congress, you could probably just stop at like prevent global war or World War III or whatever you want to impact out. So the link, internal link, impact chain is just that process of walking through kind of the steps that it takes to get from we pass the bill or we make the argument to the impact that we're getting to. So it's like in extemporaneous, you might say that like we can see inflation on the rise because of food prices. And so the link would be like food prices have gone up by over 200%. And that's the link, that food prices have gone up by, or that food prices are on the rise, right? And you kind of put that in your intro / your umbrella answer. Your internal link would be like, why is food pricing bad? And like, how is that impacting inflation, right? Or an aftershock in context of the question. So the internal link would be the idea that like because food prices have gone up by 200%, we see American families struggling to just buy groceries, and that has led to less consumer spending in other areas. And so then you could go into the impact and say like, okay, less consumer spending in other areas is causing our economy to decline, which is threatening a recession. And if a recession happens, then, we could, you could impact off. I think a recession is enough of an impact to hurt American families in Extemp. In debate, you might go further into what a recession means, like globally or economically. Yeah.
In the example you just used, when you're like narrowing it down to a specific reason, is that more for informative or more for persuasive?
Both, definitely. Remember, it's both. The only difference is the purpose of the question. So for informative, the question should be worded based on an answer exists, right? That there is an answer that exists in the content in the world, like what is the current status, or like how much aid has the United States provided to Israel? Here's an answer, right? And there is an answer that exists. Whereas persuasive is going to ask you to speculate / persuade them on what could happen. So there's a little bit more of a what did / was versus what could / will be is really the difference context of persuasive and informative. So you still are going to approach them exactly the same, in my opinion, of providing the argument as to here's what happened and here's 3 reasons that is true, right?
Okay, so like specifying down and saying like it's because of housing prices won't make it seem like you're saying that like inflation is only happening because housing prices, or like wouldn't put a persuasive spin on it.
No, because you're answering the question, right? Yeah, the answer to the question would be like if you're worried about being informative and the judge writing this sounded like a persuasive speech, it's because you're proposing or supposing that other things will happen. Informative, just stick to the facts and the truth and what did, and you won't get accused or counted off for being too persuasive, right? You should be persuasive in the idea of like you're providing the warrants, you're providing the logic behind why your answer is correct, because you still want the judge to believe that you were right? So I have to provide information and give the speech in a way that persuades the judge that the answer I just gave was correct. So is this good? 10:15 though? Right? 10:30? Okay, great. Sorry. I got another session after this. I keep mixing the times in my head. So I just had a newborn baby, well, not me, but my wife. And so I'm like we have a 1 week old in the house. So my sleeping mind is not at its top tier right now. So what I want you to do inside your points is start thinking about following that process. All right. So food prices, and follow that chain of thought. Food prices cause Americans to spend less money in other sectors. And then how will that impact your significance statement? How will that impact the economy? Why would we care? Right? It's not really, you're not really back into the answer to the question, but you're providing persuasiveness / importance to why that answer is important or is one of the main reasons. And it gives impact into it, and it makes your speech writing so much easier. Like it just does, instead of just spewing all this different information at a judge. Give them a nice, clear argument, and then tell them why that argument's important, right? Food prices are on the rise. If food prices are causing American families to spend less money on, cars, but that's another point but automobiles or leisurely activities, right? They're taking less vacations, so now tourism's down, and that's hurting a big industry of tourism. Or whatever you want to go, like let your research take you there. Like don't try and do it on your own. As you're going and finding the articles, I promise you, when you start looking for it, it's kind of like when you buy a car, right? As you start looking and you get a car of this certain color, you start seeing that car everywhere, right? When you start trying to implement this structure, and you start going into like Reuters articles and reputable sites, they're going to follow this type of thought process, right? They're going to go down this link chain in their own article. And so a lot of times it'll guide you naturally into impacting out these this information. So think about your points, your top half, right? If you'll go like in a body point structure, right? We break it down into halves. You've got your, you got your transition. I have really good handwriting, so you should have no trouble reading this. Transition, singular. And then you go into your source, right? New York Times, published an article, yada, yada, yada. You get into your warrant. That is the actual content that they said. So you're going to literally say, like, New York Times published an article that said what? You can paraphrase. You don't have to quote it word for word, but it needs to be whatever data, raw information that you're going to give, right? And then underneath that, you're going to provide that analysis slash how, I should say interpret that information. So it's like, I tell you who said it, I tell you what they said, and then I'm going to tell you how I want you to understand and apply that information, right? A lot of times this can even be part of the advanced / intermediate section. Is a lot of times extempors will just give you information and expect you to understand how to apply it or use it to the question. But don't take that for granted. Don't just say like egg prices have gone up 200%, like clearly inflation. No, provide that analysis of like why that's important, how you want the judge, how that proves back to link to your answer. I'm going to write LTA instead of write that, and then link it back to your answer. So it's like New York Times published an article that said that all food staples, bread, milk, and what's another staple? Dairy, meat, right? Beef, let's say beef, has gone up by over an average of 200% over the last 5 years. That's just raw information, right? Beef, 200%, numbers, just information. Okay. If you're a cattle farmer, you might think that's a good thing, right? Oh, good, beef prices have gone up 200%. I'm making more money. If you're a restaurant, it's probably a bad thing because now you're having to pay twice as much for the same product, right? So provide some interpretation of how you want the judge to analyze, how you analyze that information and interpret it in the context of your point. So clearly American families are not able to, money that they used to use to buy groceries is now being doubled just to be able to cook the same meal at their house. And so clearly that shows that, the aftershocks of the COVID-19 pandemic are having an effect on the American household. So that's the top half, right? So I gave you that internal link. And then now I do the same thing on the bottom half. It's just mirrored, right? I do the exact same thing. So then I go into my second source and I'm like, so Reuters published an article that talked about how because food prices, Reuters published an article on January 6, 2022 that said that American consumer spending is down because families are now having to spend twice as much money on basic necessities that they cannot remove from their budget. And so because consumer spending is down, we see our economy headed towards a recession, right? It's like source, there's warrant, there's some analysis. So clearly inflation is on the rise and it's having a major impact on American families. And the aftershock of COVID-19 pandemic can be seen in the area of food prices. So it's like I do that on top. And if you start doing the math, right, I got 20 minutes. Start doing the math on timing, right? I'm off my slideshow now, but on time, right? If let's say it takes you 5 seconds to say the source, 10 seconds to paraphrase the warrant, you do 10 seconds of analysis, and then you do 10 seconds of linking that back to your answer, right? That's like maybe 1.5 sentences average. Like, let's just say 2 sentences, 2 thoughts on each, right? Does that feel like it's pretty easy to do? Provide 2 sentences on each. Well, that's what, 35 seconds. If my transition took 10 seconds, I do that twice. 35 for the top half plus 35 for the bottom half. Y'all good at math? How long is that?
70 seconds.
Minute 10. Then I add in my transitions, 10 seconds. I'm at a minute 20, right? I do that 3 times. What's that, 4 minutes? How long is your intro usually? Minute and a half. Let's say a minute and a half intro, right? Now I'm at 5.5, right? I give a minute conclusion, and now I'm at 6.5. And that's just doing 10 seconds of analysis here. So this is where, right, as you get better, right? As you get older, you get bigger too. Okay. analysis, you can, do 20 seconds of analysis. Now that's where the extemporaneous part happens. You're not pre-writing this. This you find, this you find, this you're just applying it to your thought, right? And that's how extemping gets a lot easier, because your analysis isn't you trying to come up with like to fill time, because you're not filling anything. You're purposefully moving through your train of thought, right? Create a speech that provides you with a train of thought, and then you can just ride that train through the speech and provide some analysis. I know that I just need to tell the judge how that proves my answer correct. And so I do that in that 20 seconds, and it's natural. You don't have to think hard about it. You don't have to, there's like obstacles everywhere. You don't have to think hard about what you're trying to say, because you're just literally following the train of thought. Yeah.
So would that just be like about 6 sources total to per point?
Yeah, if you're we shoot for 7 sources, one in the intro in the background, and then 2 per point. It goes 7 total. That's what we did every state championship speeches. 7 sources, no more nor less.
But is that really doable for like all? Because sources all seem to like, some sources can help you with a specific point, but like you need 7 different sources that are filling different roles on each one. And you might have 10 sources that all say the same thing. You will only really be able to use one of them for that first half of the point, because then you need a different source that does, and then try the other thing. And like a structured out Congress speech, you might have all the time in the world to actually do that, but in the 30 minutes of an extemp speech, you'll only want to devote so much time to actually finding your sources and writing your speech and stuff like that.
So what was the question?
So like, how do you manage that, like finding sources for specific?
Well, I'll tell you, most of the time, and this is the reality of it, a lot of times you're exactly right. You're going to find 10 articles that all say pretty much the same thing, right? But instead of looking at the negative, think of it if you turn it into a positive, that most of the time, if you, especially from like reputable places, like really high quality news sources, those singular articles will give you your whole speech inside of an article. So although you have 10 places that are saying the same thing, you have one speech that can pretty much outline it for you. And then once you have, like, let's say you find one article and it just answers your question perfectly. Everything's in there, but you don't want to use that same source for every single one of your body points, right? Because then it's just going to sound like you just use the same article for your whole speech. So you do want to have differentiation of sources. It might be okay to use Reuters twice or to use one more than once. You wouldn't want to do it back to back. Sometimes you'll hear them go like inside the same body point. You might, in that same article, it's not really that big of a negative to do that once. Now, if you're using the same source all the time, or you're using low quality sourcing, then yeah, you're probably gonna hurt your scoring a little bit. But instead of thinking of it like a negative, like get your speech outline from that one speech, and then you can go and search through your database. If you use Extemp Genie, you're prepped, or you have your own files, you can search through specific content that you're looking for, because now you have, like, instead of just Googling your question or looking for an overarching thought, you can go and find that specific thing of, like, in this example, maybe I found in one article that said, like, food prices have gone up 200%. Well, then I can go and search, okay, like how is the rising food prices hurting the U.S. economy? And so now I have a different question I'm asking that brings up a whole different set of sourcing that comes through my search, and then it'll specifically be giving me the information that I need. So instead of just Googling the overarching question and then trying to fill all 7 sources, fill your speech up in kind of direction, and then you can go through and search specifically to fill those roles that you need. That makes sense? And I would say 99% of the time, especially in UIL, like you get into TFA or you go NSCA, the questions get a little bit more complex. They might have, bidirectional or triad type of questions, like how is the, war in Israel impacting food prices in Great Britain or something. It might get a little complex, but UIL is typically a little bit more straightforward, to the heart of the topic, and is not really trying to trick you up. They want to get you to get good topical speeches. So did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. So that was what, and sometimes there are some times where you're going to struggle. Like, it's just that sometimes you drew a topic that wasn't a great topic to draw. And that's a skill you get to, of learning how to pick good topics, or picking topics that are easy to answer. If If I was going to advise you on topic selection procedure, I would just pick a topic that is the most obvious, easy answer and live with whatever goes underneath that. Not about subject matter you like, not about something that maybe you gave a speech about before. If you're reading yours and one of them is very straightforward and simple, easy to answer, do that, and then get deeper into the content, right? You can provide second level content, even if the question's pretty basic. So I'm gonna go ahead and move on. So the last thing is more of a time management. So we talked about something you can put in your intro, how you can improve your transitions, and then how you can improve your body points. So this is one thing that I think is crucial for us. And I know you can't probably, but time management is such an important part, right? You go too short. I'm sure it happens to all of us. It happens to my kids too, where all of a sudden you're going along and then you're in your conclusion and they hold up the 2 or whatever, and you're like, well, crap, can't give a 2.5 minute conclusion. And so, they just mismanage their time. So one of the ways that I train my students to be able to hit a solid time every single speech is by implementing what we call flexible conclusions. And so, and like I said, I will put this online for everyone to get, and I'll give you the information on where to get it after the slide. But a flexible conclusion is basically the idea that, can y'all see that from over there? Is there a glare? I just realized. It's basically the idea that you do not want a 7 in your speech. I know students like to think, oh, I spoke for 7 minutes. In UIL, judges hate that. If you go to TFA tournaments, they give you a 30-second grace period. It's not as big of a deal. Still doesn't really help you as much as you think it does, if any at all. A 6:50 speech versus a 7:10 is the same, right? The goal is 7 minutes. If you miss it by 10 on the bottom side or miss it by 10 on the top side, it's the same in my mind. And it doesn't really, so in UIL, right, the rules. If you speak, you get 7 minutes and you can finish your sentence. So you do have a little bit of grace there, and judges are not looking to disqualify you. But I can tell you this right now, from as a coach, as someone who's run districts, and as someone has had to disqualify people and had students disqualified. Nobody wants to disqualify you. Nobody is excited about doing it, and they all are afraid of you doing it, especially if you do prose and poetry as well. Like, they're all just begging you to be quiet so they don't have to do and go talk to the tournament director, and then the coach, and they hurt the kid gets disqualified at district, and then they're out and they gave a great speech, but they can't go on. It's just a nightmare. Okay. So don't make your judges stress. Don't going 7 or getting close to 7 is just creating more stress on them to the end of your speech. And so they're the back of their head, they're not even listening anymore. They'll be like, please don't go over time. Please don't go over time. Please don't go over time. Because they're keeping time and they're doing that. I mean, that's what's happening in those last 10 seconds. You're not even getting out of the speech with the judge's attention anymore because they're so worried about having to disqualify you or paying attention. Did you really stop? Did you finish your sentence? Like, they're moving on to the procedural aspect of, like, the rules, right? They're not even engaged in the speech anymore. So that's why I said my favorite speech time is 6:50, because at that point, when they get to the 10 minute, if you stop right as they get to, giving you the countdown, then there's no stress on them. Once they get to the 10-second mark, they're thinking, okay, what do I need to do? I need to make sure I pay attention so I don't disqualify or do disqualify this person. So a flexible conclusion is literally just in the way that we preview/review our points. Okay. So we can flex anywhere from like 15 to 30 seconds inside of our conclusion so that we can really hit that target. So as you're going along, right, it's harder to manage your time over the whole spectrum, right? Now, I don't have time to get into today, but you should be having, what's what I'm looking for? Can't find the word. Signals, right? Time signals, check marks inside of your speech time of where okay, by this point I should be somewhere in my third point, or by when I get the first signal 5, I should be on the top half of my first point. I should be out of my intro and somewhere in the middle of my first point. Right? If you got an intro that's a minute and a half and you're 30 seconds into your first point, right, you should be somewhere not quite halfway through your first point when you get that first time signal. So that's your first check mark to say, okay, I'm running on good time. If you're in your intro and you get to 5, you're like, okay, I'm running behind. Like, I'm behind my own pacing. So that means that you're already have mismanaged your time, but you can, correct it as the time goes. But as you get to your conclusion, right, we usually like to start, when we get the one, at the same time, go backwards in my head. When we get the one, it says 1 minute left. That's our trigger to start to start get out of our third point into conclusion. Sometimes you're going to start concluding before, right? We want fluidity, okay? That is the number one characteristic of a good Extemp speaker. Fluidity and content are the two things that you're striving for the most, right? 6 minute, 30-second speech with really fluid, great content is probably still going to be just as good as a 650 speech. Not much difference, okay? I mean, if when you get to like state finals, and it's good extemper versus really good extemper, then that might make a little difference on time management. But for the majority of your rounds, you're going to be able to get on the top half of your room, move through place just the same, whether the speech was 650 or 630. So focus on fluidity. So transition as you go, but as you time signal, you can flex in your conclusion. So basically, think about the way that you review your points. Okay, you can do short. Oh, this is. Let's see if this is better. Yeah. Short, which basically means when you go to review your points, you just say the shortened phrase and whatever your point is like. So clearly inflation on the rise and the aftershocks of COVID-19 are being seen in housing prices, food prices, and automobile markets. Boom. That was short, right? I'm running out of time. Like they gave me the 15-second. I got to get out. So I can do it shortly, right? That took me 5 seconds, right? So, or we'll say 10 seconds, right? So on the short side, you can do your point review in 10 seconds. On the long side, so the short side, you just give the topics of the points. On the long side, you can go and give one good sentence on top of that to kind of whatever the overarching theme was or the impact was inside of that point. So instead of doing short, instead of going, so clearly we can see inflation in 3 key areas. First, the rising house prices, rising food prices, and rising automobile prices. Call back to my AGD, done, right? Instead, the long would be like, I have time. Let's say I transitioned early and I haven't even got the 30-second mark, and I'm trying to, at least wait to get that 30-second mark before I go and call back to my AGD. So clearly inflation is on the rise and impacting American families as they feel the aftershocks of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we saw that in 3 areas. First, housing prices rising, causing American consumers to not be as mobile in the economy or be less willing to take risks in moving new jobs or purchasing new houses. Second, in the food prices, American consumer spending has gone down because of the overarching theme of rising food prices. And third, in the area of automobile market, that we as industry, we have lost a lot of employment inside the automobile industry because families are not being able to purchase the materials due to the aftershocks of COVID. I haven't even thought this yet, so I'm just about. But you see, I just took the same thought and added 1 to 2 sentences on the after that to give a little more persuasion. I'm not going back. Don't go back and redo your whole point, but just give me that one overarching, like, we saw housing prices increase and that created this impact. We saw food prices increase and that created this impact. And so then I give myself, let's say that takes me, 30 seconds. Instead, now a speech that would have ended at 6:30, I now can hit my 6:50, or now a speech that would have, gone to 7:10 is now at 6:50, right? So I give myself like 20 seconds to play with there, and I don't lose that realm of or being, you don't lose that. What's the word I'm looking for? You don't get labeled a filler, right? Like you don't ever be perceived as you're trying to fill time or just rambling for a minute because you want your speech to have a certain number in the front, right? That's really obvious to judges. And so you can do small flexes in there. And I think that this is the best area I found to where you can really control that last 30 seconds and hit a time that you want. So you can get out quickly or you can get out slowly, but, and really control that last 20 to 30 seconds of your speech so that you can, flex out a little bit. And that's what I would recommend not trying to flex more than 15, 20 seconds like that, because that's when you start being, giving off the listener as you're filling time, right? Go ahead.
So you said that short and long, are we just avoiding the medium because we don't have like a good way to judge at which point where you're really getting that medium point?
There's just not really, if you go medium, then what you're going to do, like 2 points long and 1 point short. I was like, there's not really a medium. At least I haven't formulated one. If you have a formulation, you can go for it.
So it's more like just, did this time marker come up or not? Is how you decide if you're going to go along.
Yeah, you depending on when you get the one to move in, you get that 1 minute left. That should kind of be your decision factor. Be like, all right, I'm going long, right? And then you can react as they go, right? You can control. You can, instead of 30 seconds, you can do 25. That would still call that a long. I'd still call that a long conclusion, or the long conclusion. But yeah. So this will be posted on all my social media. That's why I'm recording here. And I try and put out a bunch of free resources. I've got Congress stuff out there, a bunch of Extemp videos on YouTube, so you can follow that. And I will post this under the free resources tab on the website. If you want this, this video will be on the YouTube page, and then the resources, this slideshow, will be posted on the free resources on the website. And I think that, yeah, that's it. We got 6 minutes. Is there any questions that exist, like outside of what we talked about, or any clarification, or anything that's anything? It can be anything under the realm of Extemp. I'm happy to answer. Go for it.
I feel that's the only one who's been asking.
Hey, that's how it works, right? I'm sure they have the same questions.
How do you control? Because one of the biggest things I've heard from my judges is I move around a lot. I'm not very the manner I speak sometimes is more of a factor than. And the speech itself is great. You just have to watch this one thing.
Are you talking about so in the speech, any physical motion, you should only be moving when you transitions, and while you're in your points, you should be frozen from lower half. So your upper half can move, you can lean, turn, and then so the way I teach my kids is you have a base, right? Shoulder width, standing here comfortably, arms to your side. This is your base. So everything comes out of base. You're giving your motions, whatever, to extenuate based on the words that you're using, and then you return to base. You don't want to stay in motion the whole time, because then you just get overarching, and then you present more of a nervous energy instead of a controlled energy. So 1 to 2 motions here, first, second, third, return to base, right? Return to base. Return to base. And then when you transition, then as you transition, you're verbally transitioning and you're physically transitioning in a nice poised walk, and then you set a new base. And while your first point's here, now you're back to the base.
So you can especially when you're making the more subtle transitions, you can signal it with body language since you're now starting to walk around.
Yes, you want to give verbal and physical transitions. That'll help. All those are purposeful in helping the judge stay with you through the entire 7 minutes, right? And you have to understand the judge's job is a little difficult because they're trying to take notes and listen at the same time. And a lot of these are teachers, and they're going to tell you that you can't do that in your classroom, right? You can't listen and write at the same time. So look, eye contact, listen to me. And so the same thing exists for the judge. They're trying to listen, they're trying to write, and sometimes they're trying to get a thought out based on something you said just a second ago, and then you verbally transitioned, but you didn't move your body, so they didn't pick up, they didn't hear that 5 seconds, they didn't hear your transition, and now you're still standing in the same spot, and then 20 seconds, they're like, okay, wait, he's in his body point, and so just physically transitioning as you move, even if they're writing, they're going to see in their peripheral you move. And then verbally, I would say watch other extempors or TED Talks and find someone that you identify with and try and emulate that person. You can change your diction. You can change your delivery by emulating and role playing in this moment, right? We're not a professional speaker. We're not giving a TED talk. We're role playing, and every speech and debate event is a LARP event, right? Live action role play. So find someone that you identify with and emulate that person, and that'll start once you take on, like, because if you're speaking in a way the judge says is too conversational, that means that you're speaking from your personal stance of the way you would talk to your friends at the cafeteria table, of who you naturally are. So instead, when you get on stage right in front of the room, become a persona, have a character to switch into, so that you code switch into your Extemp self, and you have developed that persona, that character, just as if you would inside of a play or a performance or anything like that. So find someone you identify with and that you want to imitate. On the professional level, I like TED Talks. You can find other extempers or newscasters, anything like that, reporters, someone that you like to listen to and that you think does a good job and that you identify with. Any other questions? Okay, I hope you found that helpful. Like I said, I'll post this video and the slideshow. Thank y'all.